Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Alex and Sean. We have on this episode some disastrous play by the Chicago Blackhawks, the Bulls going from bad to worse, and more draft previews for the Bears, and a tiny bit of Cubs news. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. So go on over to icehogs.com, check out the tickets, get a jersey, hat, shirt, more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Well, welcome back, my friend Alex. How have you been?
I have been doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing well. We were just doing our intro with the Ice Hogs, and I went to the game last night. My 2-year-old is obsessed with hockey. She calls hockey Go-Go Hawks, and she's like, Daddy, Go-Go Hawks, Go-Go Hawks. So we were like, all right, fine, let's go. So as soon as I got home from work on Saturday, we hopped in the car and went. And it was, they were wearing pink jerseys for fundraiser of some sort for something. I wasn't paying attention. But they were doing a silent auction for the jerseys, the actual ones the players were wearing. So I went over there just to see what was up. And I was like, you know what, it's charity. And I'm gonna put in a couple bids. So I picked a couple of my favorites. And I ended up putting a bid in for Rasmussen. I put in a bid for Ville Polka, and I put in another one for Forsling, and I ended up winning Ville Polka. I'm like, oh, cool, wow!
Oh,
they announced my
nice.
name overhead on the intercom. So I go down there right before the end of the game because we were getting ready to leave because it's it's like 90 minutes out there, not too bad, but I have a 2-year-old, so she. At a certain hour, she's done and ready to go to bed. And I go down there and I was like, what do you mail the jerseys out? They're like, no, you go down there, as soon as the game is over and walk out there and meet the player and get your picture with them and they sign it for you and you take it home. I'm like,
Very solid.
Okay. Yeah, so I go down there and all the Ice Hogs were down there and my daughter is like, where'd they go? I'm like, well, this is them. She's like, she was super confused because they weren't wearing their uniforms.
Yeah.
And but then they started holding up their jerseys, and then she realized, put two and two together, and so she's walking around fist bumping everybody.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they were getting a kick out of her, and so Gustav Forsling, Ville Polka comes up, and he's super nice, and we talk for a few minutes, and I get a picture of him with my daughter holding the jersey, and then he gives her a fist bump and, he signs it. And he's like, I'm sorry, it probably stinks.
Yeah, well.
We bring it to the car and like nothing personal to him is that these guys have been playing, a whole game of hockey. They sweat. Sweat stinks. And so this jersey just reeks and we're like, oh man, like the way out there, the drive was quick, and on the way home there was no traffic, so it was even quicker, but it felt like forever because we were just smelling the jersey.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Yeah, so I was talking to a guy in Lyme, and I was like, oh, which jersey did you win? And he goes, Matt Caruth, and I was like, oh, cool. And he was telling me a story that he won another jersey last year when they did this. And he's like, I left before I knew that we were just going to get the jersey. they called me and told me I'd won. So he's like, I had to come back for the next game. And he's like, I live out of state. So I came in, got the jersey, and it had been, nobody washed it. It had just been sitting there for a couple of days. And he said on the way home, like, he had it in the back of his car, and he's like, it was cold, so my windows were up. And he's like, I thought I had run over a skunk. I was like, what is this? I go in the back, and it's the jersey.
Oh, gosh.
And he's like, my whole drive back to Wisconsin was just smelly. And I was like, so I'm online today going, all right, well, I want to be careful because it's signed. So I don't want to ruin it. Wash. Yeah. And so I'm reading online, like, what to do with, because I'm there's people out there that collect the game-worn jerseys. So I'm sure that this is a thing. One of the sites was like, don't do anything, because if you wash it, you won't be able to DNA verify that it's game-worn ever.
Oh, my goodness.
And other people were like, just don't wash it. Just seal it in a frame, and it'll seal the stink.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm like, all right. And then, but somebody else said to put it in the freezer, and that'll kill the bacteria, and then you don't have to wash it. So I've got it in like the big Ziploc bags in the freezer right now.
Right? It's not red meat.
So we'll see how that works out. But it's cool. It's the pink jerseys. So now I got to go get that framed and hung up somewhere.
Yeah, the AHL does such a good job with the jerseys and the auctions and the charities, because, you look at a lot of the AHL games and every team has so many different jerseys because of these auctions, charities, and causes. And I've always really, really admired that about the AHL. They are really good with that kind of thing.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, minor league baseball does a lot of cool things that are fun. And themed nights, but I think AHL hockey does a really great job of, cause awareness and trying to make a difference.
And they don't get enough credit for it, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think they do get enough credit. And it was, and Mike Peck, who's like the general manager and the businessman, he's like the head honcho of every department for the Ice Hogs. He was out there, hand greeting everybody that won the bids and thanking them for bidding. It was just a nice thing. It was neat.
Yeah, that is neat. And next Saturday I'm going to the Allstate Arena for the Wolves Ice Hogs game, the same game that Juliana Zobrist is going to have a concert afterwards. So I'm praying to God that I might run into Ben Zobrist there. I mean, I doubt it, but I can hope, right?
Yeah, I'll be at the game as well. I was actually going to mention it to you is on Thursday night or Friday morning, friends of my wife and I, they were like, "Oh, do you want to go to the Wolves game next Saturday?" Or I think it's Saturday. And I was like, "Let's check the schedule." It was all fine. And I was like, "Sure." And then I looked and I was like, "That was the Juliana Zobrist night." So I'm like, "Oh, I'll let Alex know because I know he's going to be there as well." Because you mentioned that last week.
Yeah, just I might be wearing my old vintage Wolves jersey, so don't hurt me, please.
But so yeah, that should be fun. I don't know if we're gonna stay for the concert just because we've got a 2-year-old that needs to go to bed. I don't
know if I am either. I'm just gonna go. I go for hockey.
Yeah. So I mean, it just depends on if it's a quick game. We might stay for a little bit, depending on how she is. But
sure.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Absolutely. I love those games. I love when the Wolves and the Ice Hogs play, because at the end of the day, you just want to see a good game, because, I like the Ice Hogs because they're affiliated with the Hawks. I like the Wolves because I've grown up by them and I've always been a fan. So, I just like to have fun at those games.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's such a weird atmosphere difference between going to the BMO Harris Center in Rockford and the Allstate in Rosemont. Rosemont is a lot bigger. So when it's a big game and it's I don't know if they ever sell out. I doubt, but when they have a huge crowd, you could feel this energy. But at BMO, it's so much smaller, and there's a lot less to do in Rockford than in Chicago.
Especially in Rosemont these days, there's so much there.
Yeah, but in Rockford, there's a lot less to do, and so a lot of people, that's what their activity is, and it's really affordable. So you just get this huge crowd every night, and it's fun, and there's just like, it's a smaller arena, it's a lot more packed, and you feel the energy more. Whereas
Right.
Allstate's really big, and it's
Yes,
not meant
it
for
is.
AHL hockey. It just, it's the best venue they have for that, and so when it's not a huge crowd, it feels a little empty in the stadium, even though the numbers are huge. It just
Absolutely.
because like
Absolutely.
the whole upper balcony is like empty and none of the concessions are open. So just like a little bit of different atmosphere. But the Wolves do a good job of trying to fill it up. It's got to be hard just out of the sheer size of the Allstate Arena.
Right, there's that. And a lot of the games they sell out these days are against the Ice Hogs. And, there were days, 10 years ago when the Hawks were just completely irrelevant. There were games when the Wolves would just sell out and they'd outdraw the Hawks. And, obviously now that the Hawks are more popular, they had some effect of it. The fact that they're affiliated with the Blues, that really affects it. But yeah, at the end of the day, that arena is huge. And if they went to another arena that was 5K smaller, I'd say it would feel more compact, like you'd see in Rockford. Those are all very, very true points.
Yeah, and then just this, the hard part is they would have to go somewhere much further out, like the Sears Center or something, just to have a smaller arena. And
Right, that's really tough.
And that gets tough because then you start losing the draw of being near the city. So it's
Right.
pluses and minuses, but it's the parking situation is much better there than Rockford. The Rockford, there's like a little parking garage, and when it sells out, like it's a nightmare to try to get out of there. Where Rosemont's got this giant parking lot.
Oh, the parking's great. The parking is great at the Wolves games. It's really easy to get in and out. What direction you're coming from, it really doesn't matter. If you come from the expressway, if you come from the suburban roads, it's all easy to get to.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I live pretty close by there, so I usually take the expressway to get there, and get off, go in park, and then on the way home, I usually take like a River Road and go right through downtown Rosemont, and like Manheim and River Road, and just take surface roads back because it's
not that
easier to
bad.
get out. Yeah, it's easier to get out and get home.
Absolutely.
So we don't have a ton to talk about tonight. Well, a few Bulls things, but you want to talk about NFL football stuff, some of the Blackhawks issues, the Bulls, or the tiny Cubs news of a back end starter?
Well, I guess we can just kind of get the small Cubs news out of the way first.
All right. So the Cubs this week made a little bit of news. They signed a starter, and then that's something that Jed and Theo have been talking about, that they want to bolster the starting rotation and sign somebody, and they weren't going to make a huge splash of signing a big name guy for the front end. It was going to be more of a back end type guy, and they end up signing Brett Anderson to a 1 year, $3.5 million with some bonuses built in there. And he is a 28-year-old lefty. He played most of his career with Oakland, but the last 2 seasons with the Dodgers. He's a career 38-43 with a 3.86 ERA, a 1.32 WHIP, and 6.7 K per 9. Any thoughts about Brett Anderson?
Well, I saw the move, and I know he's been injured like no other the past few years, but when you watch the tape on him, when he's healthy and he's good, he's really good. He's got a lot of good moving pitches on them. And, that's kind of what you want to see. You want him to see him healthy, and you want to see him kind of pitching like he did when he was healthy and when he was at the top of his game. I just think it's a low-risk, high-reward move. If he turns out, great. That's really good for your rotation that we lost out on Tyson Ross. But if he doesn't work out, it's really not the end of the world. 1 year, $3 million. It's not like you're shelling out a lot for this guy.
Yeah, and with the injuries, I went back and I knew he had injury concerns, but just because of the West Coast teams, I don't watch a lot of West Coast baseball unless they're playing the Cubs. I went back and just sort of took note of what the injuries were, and he had Tommy John surgery in 2011. He had a strained right oblique in 2012. He had several disabled list stints for a stress fracture in his right foot in 2013, broken finger on his pitching hand in 2014. He had surgical procedures on his back in 2014 and this past March. So when you said he
game of
has,
operation, jeez.
yeah, he's had some injury history, but barring the back, I'm not that nervous about it. Is broken bones are broken bones. That's once they heal, you're usually okay. Tommy John, once you have one Tommy John, as long as you don't have a second one, you're usually better off.
Right.
And as long as that back comes back healthy, I'm not that concerned. And the big thing for me with him is the last full season that he played was 2015. And in 2015, he led the majors with a 66.3 ground ball percentage. That's huge in Wrigley Field, where you get some of the weird wind patterns and it becomes a short ballpark. So having ground balls and statistically last year, the best defense in the league makes it much better of an outing for you.
I was just going to say, it's good to have that, and knowing that your defense is so good, because, if you rely on them to put it in play, put it on the ground, you have guys that could vacuum it up and get the out easily. So, it makes sense. It makes sense according to his ability and what he can do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, it is a nice signing where it's got a low risk, high reward. If this guy pitches most of the season without any major injuries, if he goes on a stint with an oblique injury or something minor that I'm not worried about, then as long as he gets the majority of the season, then you have to consider this a huge victory, especially considering that Joe Madden keeps talking about spending more time in the season going with a 6-man rotation. You can do something, along the lines of spacing guys out and they're not pitching as often. Or if somebody does get injured, is you just go back to a 5-man rotation for that time and don't miss a beat.
Right.
So not too much news with the Cubs. So that was pretty much it. Any thoughts on what you want to talk about next?
Well, I guess we could go to football. I mean, like you said, there's really nothing else to talk about. I guess the only thing I could mention about baseball is Sox Fest was this weekend, and, I was listening to an interview with Rick Hahn, and he was just kind of saying how seems like for the most part the fans are behind the rebuild. So I just thought I'd throw that out there if we were on baseball really quick.
Oh yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about that. I wrote it down on a Post-it. Usually I make a note on my phone. But yeah, Sox Fest, and it's as a Sox fan, you have to feel pretty positive because your team has finally made a solid direction, and they're not going to try to do the Bulls thing where they're trying to rebuild on the fly. They're actually going to just do the right way and tear it down and go from there. And if you're a White Sox fan, is you have to think that, the Cubs lucked out in a lot of ways. Is a lot of guys hit. In baseball, your swing and miss rate with draft picks and prospects is pretty high, and the Cubs have had a pretty high average, and you have to feel that eventually that's gonna come back down to earth a little bit. But with the White Sox is they've brought in so many top prospects with their smart trades that even if they have, a middle of the road hit percentage with these prospects, is that they still have some good solid players there.
Absolutely.
And if they still end up trading Quintana and Frazier and Abreu, that they can still bring in more, and you wind up with 10, 15 good prospects. Even if half of them hit, that's 5 to 8 prospects. That's It's almost a starting roster.
Yeah, they were really lucky to have all these high value guys on their team to trade to make these splash deals with all these prospects. Because by the time Theo Epstein came to the Cubs really had nothing. Derek Lee was long gone. Aramis Ramirez was already gone. You had like Zambrano was past his prime. He was gone. Like a lot of the valuable pieces of the Cubs before he came into Wrigley Field and took over, those valuable pieces were already gone. The Sox, they had Chris Sale, they traded him. They have Quintana, they could still trade him. They traded Adam Eaton, they still have Abreu, stuff like that.
Yeah, so they've got a lot of pieces, and this is the one time you sort of think, all right, they sort of lucked out in floundering and underperforming because they had it's not that they were bad and they had no talent. That's a situation that's tougher to do, but they were bad and had some good talent that they were able to flip and be like, well, you know what? If we trade these guys, how much worse can we be? Let's rebuild, and that it worked out that way.
Right, the Sox were a team that had some talent, but not nearly enough. They had a real good top of the rotation. They had a pretty good kind of cleanup core, if you want to call it. I mean, Abreu is a pretty solid first baseman hitting wise. His consistently last year was kind of off, but overall the numbers are pretty good. So they had guys like that, and Adam Eaton was really, really good last year, but they did not have nearly enough depth to be contenders. Their minor league system was terrible. They didn't have really any young, good players. So, they just did not have... They tried to sell their team as contenders by patchworking guys like Brett Lawrie and Austin Jackson and guys who would be good platoon/utility players on contending teams as depth, where they were starters with the White Sox and they just weren't star caliber players or metrically great caliber players that you need to be a contender.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, those two names you brought up, those would be, if you brought those onto a team like an Indians or a Cubs or Dodger or somebody that's competing and right there, that's veterans, that's depth. Austin Jackson, if you bring him in when you're in with a lead late in the game, that's a great defensive substitution where you're still comfortable enough with him hitting if you need to. But if you're relying on him to be your starter, that's not always the position to be in.
Right, because you remember in the second half of 2015, the Cubs had Austin Jackson, and he was our fifth outfielder.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember. I forget that sometimes, but I'm like, yeah, remember that time Austin Jackson was on the Cubs roster? And when you saw him play down the stretch for the Cubs and in the playoffs in 2015, it was literally when the Cubs had a lead, in games 3 and 4 of the division series, and they plugged him into right field for Soler in the 9th inning. That's what he was used for. With the White Sox, he was playing every day. And, they were also relying last year, if you remember, they signed a 40-year-old Jimmy Rollins to start at shortstop. And then once they lost Austin Jackson, they had J.B. Shuck, a guy who shouldn't even be in the big leagues, starting every day.
Mm-hmm. Good old J.B. Shuck.
Yeah. He, actually, I had a encounter with him once. He was on the Angels, and my friend and I were at the game, and the Cubs were down 13-2 late, and J.B. Shuck came in for Mike Trout in the outfield, and wasn't much of us left. We were just in the bleachers. This was in 2013, by the way, and, we were just, I wasn't personally doing it, but a lot of people were just kind of playfully heckling him and whatnot. He makes the final catch of the game. He kind of turns around and shows us the ball like he's going to throw it in the stands, and then he just kind of flips us the bird and runs to the dugout. It was pretty funny.
Classy.
Very, very. It was a good laugh, though.
Yeah. So, if you're the White Sox, you have to feel good that you've made a decision. You're going in a direction. All of your arrows are pointed in that same direction. Everybody's on board, and you've made some really solid gains in that direction, you have to feel good. Whether that pans out or not, is it feels good. Then this is what I'm saying about the Bulls is, even if it's not the right decision, even if it turns out wrong, is you feel good because everybody said, listen, this is the plan. We're communicating the plan, and all of the steps we're making follow the plan. Whereas the Bulls, it's like, oh, this is the plan. Oh, we're going to do something that's contradictory to the plan. Oh, we never said there's a plan. Oh, what are you talking about? It's Fred Hoiberg's fault. It's Tom Thibodeau's fault. Like, so at least they're all on a board, and everything coming out and being said is the right thing, and all of the moves match what the plan is. You have to feel positive about that.
Right. And it's finally coming together, because there were times a few years ago, like, remember, they put together what they thought was a super team in 2015 with Melky Cabrera, with David Robertson, and that fell on its face so hard. And Rick Hahn hinted at, like, rebuilding and kind of doing what they're doing now. And then Kenny Williams steps in and says, we're not doing that. No, we're going to trade for Todd Frazier, and we're eventually going to spend like 15 some million dollars. I don't know exactly how much in a trade with James Shields. We're going to bring in a guy who hasn't played like pretty much all last year in, the former Twins guy. I'm blanking on his name.
Justin Morneau,
thank you. And he was, old, and the headline was Sox signed 2006 MVP. And I'm like, that is so Kenny Williams right there.
That is a total Kenny Williams.
It really, really is. Now, here's something really quick I want to bring up interesting about the Sox. And I was talking about this on Twitter a few days ago. And I was looking at predictions for the Cubs and the Sox record-wise. And we all know the Cubs are going to be really good. But I look at the Sox and I look at their strange history. And I always notice that they perform their best, at least the past, I'd say, decade. They've performed their best when they were not predicted to be very good. When the pressure was off, they always performed at the top of their game. The same could be said in season these past few years. They seem to play their best baseball in many scenarios when they were well out of the race, when they were pretty much eliminated. I mean, last year they went on an 8-game winning streak the day after they were eliminated. So it almost makes me think that this year that these guys are going to be playing for value. They're not going to have any pressure on them. The Sox are not going to be contenders, but I think they could be more competitive than a typical first-year rebuilding team. Like, I could see them winning mid-70s, like being somewhat competitive, and then the trade deadline will come and they sell off and then there won't be anyone left. But I could see the Sox actually being somewhat decently competitive. I could be completely wrong and they could lose 100 games, but I just feel like the Sox do like to do that. They play their best when the pressure is off.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's those last couple of years when we've all been like, on paper, this should be a competitive team, and they don't. But there's always stretches in these seasons where you're like, oh, this is the turning point. This is where they're coming back, and they don't. They just don't do it. So it would be nice. It would be nice for the fan base who's really had to. And listen, I've been part of this. I grew up in White Sox territory as a Cubs fan, so I've eaten my share of insults, but you don't want to see this team that's been suffering for several years now, especially with how bad their teams are and some of the goofy stories and suffering with mediocre manager and Robin Ventura and ownership that just has no clue sometimes, and then seeing the Cubs on this meteoric rise and winning the World Series, it just got to be a lot to take. So it'd be nice for them to see that, listen, we got rid of Chris Sale, the world didn't end, we've got a plan, and it's looking positive.
Right, and if I were a Sox fan, I'd be more upset, more down in the dumps if they didn't do all that. If they tried to continue with their half-assed rebuild and say they went out and signed like Jose Bautista to a unnecessarily big deal, or some other veteran who's, kind of past his prime, I'd be a lot more upset. At the end of the day, they know that they are loaded in the farm system now, and they know the future is the focus, and they're probably willing to suffer knowing that it can work out after seeing what the Cubs did, whereas the Cubs, nothing like this has been seen in the city before when it comes to baseball, a huge rebuild like this. We didn't know if it was going to work or not, and the Sox fans have the luxury of knowing that they can see that this does work, and they kind of get how the process works.
Yeah, and it's just, now it comes down to execution. It's, and it also comes down to, will White Sox ownership open up the pocketbooks? Because it's all fine and good to want to build solely off of homegrown talent, but you don't find too many teams that, I'm drawing a blank on any team that have solely won on homegrown talent. Is you have to augment that with free agents, smart free agency.
Right,
even when
exactly.
Even when the Yankees won all those titles in a row, is they had homegrown guys like Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter, and they had homegrown guys that were like the heart and soul of the team, but they brought in tons of free agents to bolster that. And the Cubs is they have so many homegrown guys, but they added. They had smart trades in there as well to get Kyle Hendricks, to get Jake Arrieta, free agent signing of John Lester and Jason Hayward. And so they're augmenting it. So the White Sox, it's not all done once they make these trades, and they have to cultivate these young talents. They have to use the international signings smartly. They're going to have to make some more smart trades. They're going to have to draft well, and they're going to have to open up the pocketbooks when it comes time and pony up the money to sign free agents and be able to attract MLB free agents.
Absolutely, because you need a lot of stuff to cement everything together. And, look at the Kansas City Royals, where most of that lineup was homegrown, but you look at their pitching staff, their starters, a lot of those guys, they had to get free agents or trades mainly. They had like Johnny Cueto, they had Edinson Volquez, they had James Shields for a little bit. So their rotation over the past few years, though a lot of their talent on the field was homegrown, a lot of their rotation wasn't. The same can be said for the Cubs. They even said when the Cubs won the pennant, they went with young position players, veteran arms. You see a lot of other teams go young pitchers, veteran position players. And it seems like right now with the Sox, they have Moncada, who's a infielder and looks to be really good. A lot of their prospects are pitchers. So it seems like they're taking a big young pitcher approach, because they already have another young pitcher in Rodon, so you add to that with the other guys they've gotten. So, it looks like that's kind of the big approach right now. It's going to depend on what they do with Jose Quintana. They might trade for more position players there. We'll see about that. But, at the end of the day, you do need to cement everything together with trades and signings. You can homegrow a lot of it, but, you look at those Yankees team with the homegrown talent. They've had Randy Johnson come in. They've had Paul O'Neill come in. They've had Tino Martinez come back. Stuff like that.
Yeah. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Blackhawks and then move on to the Bears.
All right.
And we'll finish up with the Bulls. The Blackhawks are an enigma. I can't quite explain them. We had 2 games this week, and they both were games that we were winning going into the third, and had third period meltdowns that turned into one-sided losses. There was the Tuesday's 5-2 loss to Tampa, Thursday's 5-3 loss to Winnipeg.
That one angered me. That game really angered me.
yeah, I just it's. I mean, Corey Crawford is struggling right now, and you're getting a lot of people coming out of the woodworks calling for the Blackhawks to trade him,
which is
or
ridiculous.
yeah, but he's adding fodder to this by not playing well, and the Blackhawks organization are adding fodder to it because they're he was benched in favor of Scott Darling, but Scott Darling didn't play well in the start he had. It's a lot of defensive gaffes. It's like some goaltending gaffes. It's the forwards for the Blackhawks not applying enough pressure and keeping puck possession. If you don't have puck possession, you let the other team have it. It's you're just asking for them to have more shots on goal and more shots on goal, and that's just asking for trouble. Eventually, your model that you've been going by this year of playing tight games and relying on strong goaltending is just going to be a collapsing house of cards. And we talked about that last week, and it's coming to fruition this week.
Right, and it's really, it's there's no doubt that Crawford isn't playing at his top game, and he's had such a good year, and he had that surgery. You're going to go into a little slump, but a lot of that to me is just seeing guys like Trevor Van Riemsdyk and some of those defensive guys just get completely burned on the ice, and people are skating circles around them and just driving to the net and scoring on them, and TVR's just kind of stuck at the ice and can't move as they're just running around them. And Duncan Keith's had a pretty good year. Seabrook has not had his best season. I think he's had a lot of problem on the blue line. And I just think this defensive core, it's either old and getting slower, inexperienced, or just guys like Trevor Van Riemsdyk who've had so many injuries and just can't keep up with the game.
Yeah, and you had Roosevelt out there for the game against Winnipeg, and that
He's on IR now.
Yeah. So it just makes you wonder what they're gonna do, because they have to have some consistency. I get you have 8 defensemen and you're trying to figure out ice time, but you're not doing any favors. Right now, this regular season, it's a marathon grind that you have to get out of the way. Once you make the playoffs, then that's when you need to perform, and you can't. These guys are getting older, they're getting slower. You can't do what you've done in the past with relying on Duncan Keith to be Superman.
Right.
These young defensemen are going to have to step up, and by giving them minimal minutes and giving them days off regularly, it's hindering their performance. And it's hard to question Coach Q because he's one of the all-time great head coaches, but you sort of have to in this position, because he's notorious for not giving chances to young defensemen and not giving chances to young guys, period, and easily putting guys in the doghouse and never letting them out. So
right.
It's you've got to work with these guys, and whether it be switching up lines, and Duncan Keith has had the luxury of playing most of the season with a veteran partner. Is maybe you put a younger, faster guy out there with him for the experience, for the minutes, and I don't know what the right answer is, but they're going to have, these young defensemen if the Blackhawks are going to go far in the playoffs, they're going to have to be an integral part of this team.
Right, and you know what? I say this, Ben's saying this, I'm not eliminating the chances of them and going on a cup run, because they still can. And, at the same time, I say this team is really showing its flaws right now. And I think the flaws have been consistent, but they just haven't been showing because goaltending in the past has bailed out the Hawks and they've gone on to win, or they get a lucky break and they score a goal late in a game you say, wow, we probably should have lost that game. And I feel like we've said that a lot this year, where we say, wow, we're really lucky to get 1 or 2 points out of that game the way they played. I think now that that luck with those flaws is just starting to run out. And I know what everyone says, they've been in slumps in January before, they do it every year, blah, 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 blah. Talk about this team. This is not the 2015 team. This is not the 2013 team. This is not the 2010 team. This is a different team. And they have shown similar flaws all season long. And now that, the goaltending, it's, it's really hard for me to blame the goaltending, but they couldn't play Superman throughout this entire season. Eventually, I think we all said to ourselves, this is going to this luck of this goaltending keeping us in games and helping us win these lucky games, it's going to run out and they're going to lose some tough ones here. And I think that's what's happening. Maybe they make a move and can help fix things, sure, but there's a lot of growing pains on this team. There's a lot of inexperience on this team, and a lot of this other team, parts of this team, like the defense, like Seabrook and Keith and Hjalmarsson, they're just getting older. And after all these years, these long playoff runs, it's going to catch up to you physically eventually.
Yeah, and a couple of stats here about these games is a little bit of parallels with the Tampa and the Winnipeg games. Is in the Tampa game, the 5-2 loss, Tampa scored 4 goals in the third period, including Tyler Johnson scoring twice in 30 seconds. And in the 5-3 loss to Winnipeg, they Andrew Kopp and Brian Little scored 32 seconds apart in the third period. And for the Tampa game, Tampa had lost 3 in a row going into this game. And in their last 10 matchups in the regular season versus the Blackhawks, they're 8-0-2 versus the Blackhawks. This is also the 4th straight win against the Blackhawks by the Jets.
Yeah, we cannot beat them. They have some voodoo stuff on them this year, on the Hawks this year, and because in the past the Hawks have just beaten up on the Jets. Yeah,
these are young, speedy teams that they match up really well against the Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks used to always be able to answer with skill and speed, and they just don't have that to match up with anymore.
Right, and right now, I think we can all say that the whole thing of trading Tays is absolutely asinine and crazy, and that's just ridiculous by every means. And Tays is playing much better scoring rise recently. I mean, he really is. So he had, really bad long slump, kind of having a down year overall, and, that's going to happen, but I still think he's got plenty left in the tank to be one of the best players in the NHL. Same with Kane. But, the core around, just overall, it's all getting older. And, I think many Hawks fans may be in denial of that, but it's the truth.
Yeah. And prior to Tuesday's game, the loss to Tampa, the Blackhawks hadn't lost when leading after 2 periods in 17 games. They were 16-0-1 and were 78-0-5 in the regular season since the final game of 2013-14 when leading after 2 periods. So it was just utter dominance that we're used to after leading going into the third, and they just had 2 epic collapses back to back.
Right, and in that Winnipeg game, they had chance after chance after chance the way they were playing to just put that game away. I think there was that one play by Jonathan Toews who shot the puck through his legs and it grazed the post and went out. And I'm like, oh, great, so now Winnipeg's going to tie it. Like a few minutes later, boom, they tied it, and then next thing you know, boom, they take the lead. Lately just giving up these goals back-to-back so quickly. It's frustrating. It really is.
Oh, it's absolutely frustrating. But we do have Marcus Kruger back from injury. He'd been on injury reserve for a while, but he's he's back now, and you also have the rise of Tanner Caro, who is and Nick Schmaltz. And what is this going to mean for the futures of Desjardins and Jordan Tutu?
Jordan Tutu, I mean, he's why is he on the roster? I mean, I know they need a quote enforcer, but I mean, the Hawks have never had the enforcement level really a priority. I mean, sure, you had Andrew Shaw scrapping around, and before that you had like Dustin Byfuglien, but at
Dan
least
Carcillo.
those guys and Dan Carcillo, but all those guys were more talented than Jordan Tutu. I think you can agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even Carcillo, had he not had a bad attitude and on the ice and some injury concerns, he was actually a pretty decent player.
Yeah, he was, and he did some small little things. He wasn't obviously a huge major 20-plus goal scorer, but he did some little things where Tutu just really doesn't do much. And if he's not on the ice, he's upstairs, in the press box eating peanuts out of the bag.
Yeah. So, but Desjardins, I mean, is it a bad thing if you squeeze him out? I just don't really think so, because he doesn't make a lot of money, but he's getting older. You're not getting as much production out of him as you have in the past. And if younger guys are going to come in there and take his spot, then that's a good problem to have.
I agree. And, I feel like with him, he came in, he did his job. He was part of that 2015 Cup team. It might be time to move on from him. It almost kind of reminds me of what Michael Hanzus was a few years ago. He was good for a little bit as a role player. He did his job, but I'd be just fine with him moving on for some of the young talent, like you said.
Yeah. So the Blackhawks now are off until after the All-Star break, until their next game is Tuesday. But they've got is it San Jose on Tuesday?
I believe so.
Yeah, so it's going to be a tough game on Tuesday. Hopefully that, Crawford is not playing in the All-Star game, so hopefully this, half a week break is going to be good for him in getting back to where he needs to be. And hopefully it's the little R&R break for the Blackhawks is what they need, because it's they're coming right out to a team gunning for them. So it's they better be prepared.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Blackhawks schedule coming up, because they got their second big road trip. Keep in mind, because they're going to be at San Jose, at Arizona, at Dallas, at Minnesota, at the Jets, at the Oilers, and then they come back for one game against the Oilers at the United Center. Then they go back on the road for the Sabres and the Wild again. So they got their next big road trip coming up, and it's gonna be some important games there to try to kind of get back on track. You obviously don't have to win them all. Like I said, they've stacked up a good number of points, but you want to at least have a 500 trip. You beat Arizona. If you can beat the Oilers, even though they're much better, they really are. They're only 2 wins behind the Hawks right now. And it would be nice if they could solve the Wild and the Jets. The Stars with their scoring, their defense is not very good, but they're always a tough opponent for the Hawks, I feel like. And the Sharks is going to be a really tough opponent. So, you got some big games coming up, and you want to start getting some points back, because other teams like the Wild around them are playing very well right now. And, you just kind of want to at least keep a decent pace. So, we'll see what happens, and we'll see what kind of moves come up, whether from Rockford or maybe a trade or two. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. This big road trip is going to be important, and you're right. It's a 500 record. If they don't come back with a 500 record, it's not going to be. It's going to be a long road ahead going towards the playoffs, because they're gonna be chasing teams, and they're gonna have teams nipping at their heels because they're not that far ahead of, the last wild card spot. They're not that far ahead, and a really rough road trip can really turn the tables the wrong way. But if they were to do it and come back off this road trip with a lot of points, whether it be wins or taking teams in overtime, that could be a big jolt to them, a spark for them to wind up winning the division, which would be, I think, big for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, I mean, at this rate, you just kind of want to take every point that you could get. You want to make sure that you're playing full games of hockey, because I feel like a huge problem with the Hawks this year is they have one great period and then they have one just horrible period. And unfortunately, the last two games, those horrible periods came in the third period when it was a close game. So they need to do a better job of staying consistent in games and not being very up and down. Playing 60 minutes of hockey has been kind of a struggle and kind of an inconsistency for them this year. I think, I think Coach Q realizes that. I think the players realize that, and knowing that they're going into the second half of the season, a little less than it, they know what the situation is, and it's all a matter of execution. I think there is little doubt that they're not aware of the situation that they are in right now. They know they have a lot of points. They know that there are a lot of other teams around them that are competing as well, and they want to keep pace with that. So, it's all execution right now. And with a lot of the young kids on the roster, we'll see what happens with them. I mean, you have guys like Hartman and Hinostroza and Carroll who are really stepping up. So, let's hope they keep doing their thing and everyone just works better as a unit, better than they have the past few games.
Yeah, and quickly looking at the standings, is with 3 games in hand, Minnesota is already 4 points ahead of the Blackhawks. So, I mean, if they win these next 3, they could, with the same number of games, they could be 10 points up on the Blackhawks, which is is big.
Yeah, that really is. And I really, really, really hope that when the second half of the season starts, I just want to see more consistency, because I feel like consistency was just so lacking in the first half. And there's a lot of fundamentals, in a lot of those games that helped contribute to that lack of consistency. You want to see them have better special team play, whether it's on the power play or on the PK, because that was just a roller coaster this year. You want to really see more consistency with that, because it makes a big difference in games. You want to have a good power play unit and you want to have a good PK unit. And in the first half, that was a roller coaster that got pretty ugly sometimes.
Yeah. So now that we're in the All-Star break, let's move on and talk a little bit about Bears/NFL draft. This week, not a lot of Bears news per se. It's Senior Bowl week, so there's a lot of talk about the Bears having this opportunity for their coaching staff to coach up the Senior Bowl players. And I keep hearing, oh, this is great. They really get to learn more about the players and their work habits in practice and in the meeting rooms. And I'm not trying to minimize it, but I'm also trying not to overblow it as well. The reason is that most of the guys that are in the Senior Bowl in the last several years are not the major superstar first-round type players. They're more mid-round players. So you might get a good heads up about a guy who, for a third, fourth round, maybe later, but they're not going to be these super impact guys. So I want to temper their expectations. It's not like, well, the Bears coached the Senior Bowl, so they're gonna draft. It's gonna be another Butkus Sayers draft. I think let's slow the rolls. Is the Butkuses and the Sayers of the world aren't playing in the Senior Bowl anymore.
Yeah, and I want to ask you something really quick. Are you sad or upset that you are currently not going to enjoy the all-important Pro Bowl? Don't you just miss watching that?
True fact. I've never seen the Pro Bowl in my whole life.
Really?
I most of the time it happens and I'm like, oh wait, I missed it. Because remember, it used to be after the Super Bowl.
Yes.
That after that moment, it's just like, the Super Bowl is like the that big culmination of the season, and
It's the epic conclusion.
yeah, and it's over, and then you just sort of forget about it because the bowl games are over, and the NFL playoffs are over, Super Bowl's over, and you just sort of turn football off and you focus on draft mode, and I
Right.
forget about it. And now that they do it the week before, but it's you don't have any of the players that are in the Super Bowl, obviously. You don't have a lot of the players that were in the playoffs, period. And a lot of guys just don't want to get injured in this game, and they drop out, and you just wind up with it turns out to be, instead of this cool thing, it ends up being who was comfortable enough to play in this game.
Right, exactly.
It's far and away the worst of the professional all-star games.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I just flicked it on right now just for laughs, and Jordan Howard's in right now at running back. So yeah, cool. But usually when the Pro Bowl is on every year, I watch maybe a minute or two of it, and then I'm like, okay, that's enough. Part of me thinks that they should just kind of get rid of the game and just like have the Pro Bowl as an honor. I don't know if they could really do that. I think there's profit to be made from that, so I don't think they could just get rid of it. But I don't think a lot of people would really miss it. Now, if I had the opportunity to go to the Pro Bowl and watch it in person, I bet I'd have a good time. But people don't go out of their way to watch it on television.
With this Pro Bowl, I don't know. Maybe if they did more, this is probably when you were a tiny little, maybe even before you were born. They used to do these neat skill competitions that were on Saturday afternoon, like Pro Bowl things, and it had like basically they had like targets on a golf cart, and somebody would drive the target across the field in this golf cart, and somebody else would have like another golf cart that they would drive with a defender mounted to it, and the quarterbacks had to throw short, intermediate, and long passes and see if they could hit the target. And they had like chalk on the end of the ball, so it would leave a chalk mark on the target, like if you hit the bullseye, you got full number points, and they added points to all these quarterback competitions. And something like that, much more fun for me than them playing in a game, is because you see these guys without pads, without helmets, laughing and joking. It's no pressure. You're not worried about injuries, so more guys are willing to do it and be there. So
Right.
You could have the Aaron Rodgerses and the Tom Brady's there, because it's not an injury thing. It's more of a fun, and they're laughing and joking.
Right, yeah, it kind of reminds you of the hockey skills competition that you see in both the NHL and the AHL, which, by the way, the AHL skills competition is also on right now, just kind of funny right there. But yeah, they wouldn't worry about the injury, and, I think people would be more interested because you could see your favorite players, like you said. People could watch, like Drew Brees or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers participate in this, and now, those guys, they don't want to participate in that, and you're certainly not going to participate it if you got to play in the Super Bowl next week.
Yeah, and it's I just remember watching Warren Moon and Randall Cunningham and these guys that you didn't get to see a lot of, just because it was prior to so many. I just had regular TV, and games were only on regular TV, so you only got to see them if your team was playing them, or if there was highlights on the news or something. So it was fun. It was neat, and I just wish they would go back to more things that are fun. They're already at rock bottom with their product for the All-Star game. You can go nowhere but up.
Exactly. And when you think about the Pro Bowl and you think about the way they play, and the whole time you're just saying, when you look at these teams, do you really think that they want to be out there just kind of playing half-assed almost, or you think they'd want to be playing an actual game, but they know they don't want to because they don't want to get hurt and it's a meaningless game? So if you did these little skill type things, maybe they'd have more fun with it.
Absolutely. And guys are competitive. These are competitive guys. So if you do like competition type things where you're not worried about getting hurt, like have the wide receivers run, obstacle course. That's another thing that they had is like the defensive linemen would have defensive line obstacle courses. And that was fun. So there was defensive linemen were competing. The running backs had an obstacle course and like sprints that they had to run. That was fun for me as a kid. And, maybe it's not fun for adults. I don't know. I didn't watch it as an adult. But it's fun for the kids. Like, adults aren't watching your product in the Pro Bowl anyway. So is what it should be is like, that should be the all-star type thing. And it should be all pro as the honors. Like you're just honored. Exactly.
And like, what if there was like a competition, like a Hail Mary competition where you see how far a quarterback can throw from how many yards, and have like receivers like who are kind of defended, like catch it. Like that kind of stuff would be so much fun to watch. Like who wouldn't want to watch the best quarterbacks going up against each other in a longest yard Hail Mary competition, like a home run derby almost?
Yeah, absolutely. But the NFL, they quote know better, and they're going to do what they're going to do. And, one day they'll finally listen to the fans and sort of give them what they want rather than do profit-driven type things.
Right.
But other than that, there's really not a lot of Bears news right now. It's all focusing things on the draft. And I try. My New Year's resolution from last year was don't read the comments on articles. Which I think was a good one. And I have just not been able to help myself. So
I feel you.
Anytime I see an article about Deshaun Watson, I know I just feel like I have to jump in there and argue. And Bears fans are like dead split. It's people that are saying, you know what? He's not rated that high by the people that do this for a living. And we have the number 3 pick. Why would we waste that? Which I feel is the right decision. And then you have people that are like, I saw him in one game ever and he was awesome in it, so we should draft him. And I get so frustrated. So I kind of went through the past 10 years of quarterbacks in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft. So I started in 2007, and all quarterbacks in the first 2 rounds, and I sort of lumped them into bust, not bust. And I didn't come up with a defined definition. It was sort of like an eyeball test. So the 2007 draft. And so the reason I'm doing this is I just want people to hear that, just because somebody was awesome in college doesn't mean that's going to translate into the professional ranks.
Oh, absolutely.
And so talking about just these guys that were drafted in the top 2 rounds, that means that a lot of professional evaluators thought that these guys were awesome and they just never panned out. And you'll see how few actually did pan out. 2007 draft. These are the quarterbacks that were drafted in the first or second round. Jamarcus Russell was drafted first overall by Oakland. Brady Quinn was drafted 22nd overall by Cleveland. Kevin Cobb, 36th overall by Philadelphia. John Beck, 40th overall by Miami. And Drew Stanton, 43rd overall by Detroit. I'm going to consider all of those guys busts.
Well, Jamarcus Russell is one of the premier examples of a bust in all of sports draft history. When you think of bust, you think of him a lot of the time.
Yeah, and he was a guy who was exceptional in college, but when you go back and look at that, his performance and his skill set and who he was, none of it added up to, hindsight's 2020, but none of it added up to a guy that's going to lead your franchise. And it really set Oakland back for a number of years.
And think about the work ethic too that was so controversial.
Yeah, and this was prior to slot draft slot payments of what their salary is. So they spent a lot of money on Jamarcus Russell, and they were saddled with him for years because they couldn't get rid of that contract, and they just were bad, and it took years to get over that. They're finally just getting over it now.
Yeah.
The 2008 draft, let's see, Matt Ryan went first overall. I'm going to consider that not a bust.
Not at all. He's playing in the Super Bowl.
Next quarterback drafted was Joe Flacco at 18th. And I'm not going to consider that a bust. I don't think he's great by any stretch, but he's won a Super Bowl, and he's led his team to the playoffs, and he started a lot of games for Baltimore. Mediocre level quarterback, but I'm going to consider not a bust from his accomplishments.
Agreed.
Then the next two, and the last two that were drafted within the first two rounds were Brian Braum, 56th overall by Green Bay, and Chad Henne, 57th overall by Miami. Busts.
Yeah.
So you were batting 0 in 2007 and 50-50 in 2008. 2009, Matt Stafford went first overall to Detroit. Definitely not a bust.
Not a bust.
5th overall to the New York Jets was Mark Sanchez. Bust.
Yeah. Butt fumble.
17th overall, Josh Freeman by Tampa Bay. Bust.
Mm-hmm.
And 44th overall, Pat White by Miami. Bust.
Who?
I think they ultimately moved him to wide receiver, but so that's a batting 1 for 4 in 2009. 2010, Sam Bradford went first overall to the Rams, and I'm going to consider him not a bust, even though he hasn't lived up to that first overall billing.
I'm kind of tempted to call him a bust with the injury problems, but he is still playing, and he has had his moments, so I guess not a complete bust.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be as loose as possible. He's been on his third team already since 2010,
right?
But he is a starter, and he has played a lot of football, and he's going to continue to be a starter somewhere. But being first overall, he didn't live up to that hype.
Absolutely.
The next quarterback drafted in that draft was Tim Tebow, 25th overall by Denver.
Yeah. Now he's batting 125 with the Mets organization.
Yeah. Then 48th overall by Carolina was Jimmy Clausen.
Oh.
So, yeah, this one, at best, you're 1 for 3. 2011 draft, Cam Newton went first overall. You can't call him a bust.
Nope.
Next was Jake Locker, 8th overall by Tennessee. Blaine Gabbert, 10th overall by Jacksonville. Christian Ponder, 12th overall by Minnesota.
Ooh, bust. Big bust.
Yeah. Then 35th overall was Andy Dalton by Cincinnati. Not a bust.
Not a bust. Except in the playoffs.
Yeah. 36th overall, the very next pick, Colin Kaepernick by the 49ers. And I don't know what to call him. You have to consider leaning towards bust there.
Definitely, because, I mean, he started off good. He got them to the Super Bowl, and then things kind of went downhill from there. And we mentioned Jake Locker. He had the talent. He just got so many unfortunate injuries. It killed his career, literally.
They were hoping he would be Ben Roethlisberger.
Right. So you could technically call it a bust, but that's not due to talent.
And I forgot to mention that I'm just talking about the first 2-round draft quarterbacks, but I also went through every quarterback that was drafted in these drafts. And if there was anybody of note after the second round, I noted them. So we're coming up on, in this draft, the first notable quarterback that was taken after the first 2 rounds. And it was Tyrod Taylor, 180th overall by Baltimore. And not a star, but he's still at least a viable quarterback in this league.
Not terrible.
2012 draft. First overall, Andrew Luck. Good quarterback.
Very good quarterback with not a very good team around him.
Yeah. Second overall, RG3. Bust.
Bust. Huge bust.
8th overall, Ryan Tannehill, Miami. And we don't know what he is yet. We don't know. Then after that was Brandon Weeden, drafted 22nd overall by Cleveland. Yeah. Next was Brock Osweiler, who was drafted 57th.
Bust.
Yeah. And then notable quarterbacks that were drafted outside the first round were Russell Wilson, who was 75th overall, and Kirk Cousins, who was 102nd overall.
Not busts.
Not busts. 2013, there was only 2 quarterbacks drafted in the first 2 rounds. E.J. Manuel was 16th overall by Buffalo. Bust. And Geno Smith, 39th overall by the Jets. Bust.
Massive one.
2014, Blake Bortles was drafted 3rd overall by Jacksonville. We don't know what he is, but it's not looking pretty.
Not looking too good.
Derek Carr was 36th overall.
Looking very good so far.
Johnny Manziel was 22nd overall by Cleveland.
Nuclear explosion bust.
Yeah. And the unknown was Jimmy Garoppolo was drafted 62nd overall. I put him as unknown. We don't know what he is.
Yeah, we don't know what he looks like outside of Bill Belichick's system. He could be decent. We'll see.
And 2015 draft, only 2 quarterbacks were taken in the first 2 rounds, and they were the number 1 overall pick and the number 2 overall pick in Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, and both are performing pretty well so far.
Absolutely.
And then last year, there was only a handful of quarterbacks taken in the first 2 rounds. Jared Goff was first, Carson Wentz second, Paxton Lynch was 26th overall, and Christian Hackenberg was 51st.
Yeah, kind of early to tell, really.
Yeah, I mean, Carson Wentz looks like he's the best
deal.
of the yeah. Jared Goff had some. I mean, he was benched for most of the season, but later on he did some nice things. We have no idea Paxton Lynch and Christian Hackenberg. It's not looking good when you can't win the Jets starting job.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, looking at that list, who would you say is the biggest bust of them all? I want to hear your thoughts first.
I mean, it's hard to not say Jamarcus Russell because when you take a guy number 1 overall, he's supposed to change your franchise. He's supposed to be the face of your franchise. He's supposed to lead it, especially when it's a quarterback. I mean, look what Andrew Luck did for the Colts. He is the face of that franchise.
They went from 2 to 14 to the playoffs in 1 year.
Yeah, and there's some good ones on there that are just. I mean, Jamarcus Russell's got to be my far and away number 1. Yeah, it's hard to call any of the Cleveland quarterback draft picks busts just because that team is a bust. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Like, could they have been better on another team, or was it they Cleveland him? But Mark Sanchez was another big one for me. You had a lot of high expectations for him, and he went to New York and just, was a disaster.
RG3 was a pretty big one, if you ask me.
RG3, I was arguing with people left and right during that draft, and I was just like, He's a system quarterback, and when you remove him from that system, I don't like what I see.
Right.
And people were just like, I mean, a lot of people were throwing some nasty comments like, you're saying that because he's a black quarterback, and I'm like, no, I just see system quarterback here, and that system has put out some quarterbacks that put up some ungodly type numbers, and they don't translate into the NFL. And RG3 had a very good first year, but they instituted an offense built to make him good with that pistol offense. And when teams had a whole offseason to figure it out, they did. They figured it out. And when he was a one-trick pony and they figured out that trick, he has been a bust ever since. And he has gotten now outplayed by a guy who was drafted 102nd overall.
Right, that, and then he got injured. All those injuries also didn't help when things were going downhill. But, yeah, definitely. I think, to me, one of the huge busts was Johnny Manziel. One of the reasons being, you look what happened to him, like all this trouble, all this legal trouble, and barely played in the NFL, and it was pretty ugly, and now there's all this stuff on the side with him. You just really rough personal life in some areas. That's kind of a sad story right there.
It's definitely sad. I don't wish that upon anybody,
No.
but Cleveland should have known better. They should. I mean, every red flag was there. I mean, would you have guessed that he was going to go off the deep end as bad as he did? Of course not. It's like Adam Pac-Man Jones. You saw a lot of red flags coming out of college, but did you expect him to punch a police officer and spit in a nurse's face who is, or shooting open fire in a strip club? Like, do you expect those things? No, of course not. But there's enough character issues that you should just be like, I'm not comfortable investing this valuable first round pick on this guy when he's already, his skill set and his size don't translate well into the NFL, and he's got character issues.
Right, and we all know those character issues were there going into it, and seemed like the Browns just like, hey, Johnny Football, big name, let's get something going in our franchise, let's take him. And then when they took him, you saw that look on his face knowing he was going to Cleveland. And how many games did he play in Cleveland? Not a lot, because it was a few
6?
games maybe that much, and then after that, not another snap in the NFL, and he never will play another snap in the NFL.
Nope, he will never get another chance in the NFL. He might play professional football, but it'll be in like Canada or some weird startup league. It won't ever be in the NFL.
Right, and this is very different from Tebow, where Tebow was a nice guy by nature and was a good character. He just wasn't a good NFL quarterback, and you see it's kind of weird with the baseball thing, but he has potential to do other things, while Johnny Manziel, there's a lot of just rough personal issues with him right now, and people don't want to affiliate them with him, unless he really drastically changes. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that yet. There's still drama and bad things coming from his personal life that you don't want to see, and you can't see someone wanting to have him as part of their organization, no matter what position it is.
Yeah, and a couple of the guys that are busts, I don't look at them as the hugest busts on their part. It's more on the team's part, like Jake Locker, Jacksonville with Blaine Gabbert, Christian Ponder with Minnesota. Those are three guys. EJ Manuel as well with Buffalo. Those are guys that you should have draft. They should have been later rounds, and they should have. It's the team that went and drafted them way too early, and those guys are what they are, and these teams were so quarterback hungry that they majorly reached to get these guys. So it wasn't the evaluation process; it was the teams chomping at the bit. And the whole point of this exercise, I went back through all this, is that I want people to temper like their expectations with reality, that drafting a franchise quarterback is really hard.
Yes, it is.
It's really hard. In this list, how many Hall of Fame? This is the last 10 years. How many Hall of Fame level quarterbacks are in this list?
Hall of Fame quarterbacks?
Like level, like what guys that you see are guys that one day you think they might be in the Hall of Fame. Matt
Ryan, maybe. If Andrew Luck had a team around him, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Andrew Luck someday. Matt Ryan, definitely.
Yeah.
Andrew Luck, maybe.
Other than that, I really can't think of it.
Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota are like legitimate starters, but I just don't see them putting up Hall of Fame type numbers.
Some is too early to tell, but
the ones from last draft definitely way too early to tell. But I mean, 10 years of drafting, and you've got one guy that's good enough. You see him in the Hall of Fame someday. That just points how hard it is. And
I mean, Russell Wilson and Joe Flacco, they have rings and they have led their team to a Super Bowl, but they're not Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks.
Yeah, so it's when I just want people to have a realistic view is that, sure, Sean Watson should be in the College Football Hall of Fame. He's been fantastic, and Dabo Swinney talks so highly of him about what his character is, and I love the story that this is probably well before your time, but there was a running back named Warwick Dunn who played for Atlanta and Tampa Bay, and he a good football player, but like a really good person, and he's really well known for building these affordable homes in low income communities. Deshaun Watson grew up in one of those homes. Like it's a neat thing, and he's a good kid, and you wish him well. But I just don't see enough. Like he has too many red flags for me to draft a third quarterback because it could be a real bust. And my point is just because somebody's a good quarterback in college, and there's tons of good quarterbacks in college every year, and how many of them translate into good quarterbacks in the NFL. So I want people to just get a dose of reality and think, I don't want them to be like, well, the Bears didn't draft a quarterback number 3 overall. That's why they suck. No, it's just there is not a lot of good options right here, number 3. And number 3 is a bad place to be, is because what are the odds that there's 3 really good quarterbacks coming out of a draft? Otherwise they have to trade up to 1 or 2. It's a crapshoot, and you really need to get somebody that's going to just be a solid type guy. If you can get a Joe Flacco out of a draft, you live with it, because the Aaron Rodgerses and Tom Brady's of this league don't come around very often.
Tom Brady was drafted in the 6th round, for goodness sake. I mean, they come in all places, really. And also, think about a lot of the great quarterbacks of today, Aaron Rodgers being a big example. They were raised in a system with either great coaching, like Tom Brady and Belichick, or behind another Hall of Fame quarterback, Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. That does play, I think, a big role in developing in the National Football League. Not for everyone, obviously, and I'm just kind of talking quarterbacks here, but you see a lot of those guys really had the right people mentoring them with the right system. So, that just kind of further shows that just because you draft someone out of college and they're really good in college, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll translate, because the system, the coaching, whatever they are getting mentored can be very different from when they got in college.
Yeah, and also is the style of offenses that they're running in college aren't pro-style offenses. So unless pros decide to change and start running all these spread formations and look more like the college game, which I don't see happening, is quarterbacks aren't going to, you're not going to evolve. And I mean, this is for another episode because this is a deeper point, but someday the NFL is going to have to address the lack of quarterback talent. And I've heard rumblings that Mike Shanahan and a bunch of big, deep-pocketed investors are looking to start another football league, a professional league that's going to rival college, not pros, and it's going to focus on quarterback development so these guys can move to the NFL and be more prepared, learn to read defenses rather than just throw hot routes or, spread offenses and just find open guy, but actually read a defense and understand NFL play calling and be under center.
Right, and there's a lot of talk about some people kind of wanting like a farm system, more or less, for the National Football League. That way they could develop and play consistently under, the right coaching and the right people that they know how to develop, kind of that whole idea. So, obviously those ideas are thrown around, and it'll be interesting to see where that kind of stuff goes in the future.
That's actually something I've had in an older episode a couple years ago, that I really wish the NFL would have a D-League, but not parallel with the NFL season. Have it in the off season, have it over the summer. Is that way, have it be like around now through the summer.
Like a summer league.
Yeah, so it's a continuation of the season, so you have more football, so you're having more exposure, and you can watch these teams play, and then if you're not interrupting your training camp, you're not interrupting the season, these guys can play and be able to be utilized with all the skills and development that they've gotten during this, minor league, for lack of a better term. This D-League.
And you know what? You can kind of play the game where you say, all right, here's kind of our D-League. Here are the guys we kind of want to call up, and other prospects we have. We could put them on a practice squad, and if you need to call them up, you got to call them up, and you do your main developing and playing and controlling, in the NFL offseason. And, that way, if the franchises have their own developmental league farm system teams, their general managers can really look hard and observe the way they play and have even the coaching staff intervene without having to worry about both systems twice.
Yeah, and instead of having unsigned or undrafted rookies, is make them go and play in this league as well. So take all the players that aren't drafted and have them play in this league and have like a second draft or, whatever the case may be.
Right, you could kind of pick and choose. If you take a guy first overall and you think he's ready for the big show, then you bring him into the big show. If there's someone who's not ready, you send them to the farm league and you let them develop for a year. If you think we drafted a quarterback for the future and right now we're in a transition mode, but we want to get him consistent playing time under right development, then you can play him in this farm system for a year in the off season, and then you bring him in for the regular season. Now, of course, you have to think of logistics as well, because the physical toll, it's hard to play year round. So obviously if there was a farm system or a farm league, you'd probably have to lower the ante a bit on how often you play, how long you play. But, ideas like that, could possibly develop at some point. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and springboarding from there is this week took a look at the tight ends in this draft. And for those that are new to the show or have never heard the draft episodes, is what I do is I go and I watch game film, not highlight reels or whatever, but I actually watch game film. So it's cut where, if it's an offensive player, say it's a right tackle, is I watch every snap that right tackle is in, and it goes one after the other, and it's cut. As soon as the whistle blows, it's cut and goes right into the next snap. So I watch game film, and I watch the entire game, every snap of that player, and I watch multiple games to kind of see what traits I see, some of the tendencies, things that I think will translate well into the NFL, or things that I don't think will translate well. And every week we focus on one position leading up to the NFL draft. So last week we did running backs, and that was the first one of the season. So if you guys missed that episode and want to hear about running backs, you can go back and listen to last week's episode. This week is tight ends, and I didn't focus on too many. I didn't have any, I've had a lot of requests for for position or players, but nobody's requested tight end, so I just picked a handful of guys, just because they tend to not be drafted as early, and even good ones start to fall a little bit later, just out of the tendencies of the league. So the first one I looked at was O.J. Howard, the tight end out of Alabama, 6'6", 242. So big guy. Pros on him is he's got a nice height, is 6'6", and he's got good size on him. He's a willing blocker. He'll stick his nose in there. He's not afraid to block. And in space, once you're out there and he's blocking cornerbacks or safeties, he's a very good blocker in space. He's got really nice hands, and he's got some nifty footwork for a guy his size. But the cons on him are he doesn't look like a tight end on the field. He looks more like a stocky wide receiver. Think like an Alshon Jeffrey almost. He's going to need to improve his inline blocking skills at the NFL level, because when he's blocking in space against a linebacker or a cornerback, he's good, like on end arounds or wide receiver screen type things. But when he's in line blocking against defensive ends or blitzers or whatever, he's not very good. He's got a lot more work to do with strength and such. He's had some shoulder injury concerns, which is never good for a tight end. And he relies way too much on his athleticism rather than being a smart route runner or being football smart. He's relying too much on his athleticism. I think ultimately he has all the tools to be a really great tight end in this league, but there's just something I can't put my finger on that sort of scares me about him. At best, he's going to be a Jimmy Graham type, but like I said, is there something I can't put my finger on that I would shy away from him unless he just had a dramatic fall? But he's a very talented offensive player.
Yeah, WalterFootball.com. It was the same website I was referring to last week when we did running backs. They project him to be between rounds 1 and 2. And projected 40 time is 4.64, and as you said, very big guy, 6'6", 251. So that'll be interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah, I wonder, late first, early second. I would be shocked if he fell to early second, unless there's some trades in there where teams are moving up from some guys. But I picture him as a late first rounder, and talent-wise, that's where he belongs. But like I said, is there something I just can't figure out? I don't know if I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about him that just scares me, and maybe it's like sometimes his play looks a little bit like he lacks preparation, or he's any guy that relies on his athleticism too much in college scares me a little bit, that when they go to the NFL, if they try to do that, they're gonna get blasted. So that's what scares me about him. And there's a couple other guys who I like in this tight end class better than him, that if I'm looking for an early tight end, I would look there first. One of those guys is David Njoku, the tight end out of Miami. A little bit smaller, 6'4", 245, but he looks physically much bigger. He's a very, very athletic guy for his size. There's one game I was watching game film on against Pitt, and he had this incredible leap over the defender into the end zone for a touchdown. That was just absolutely amazing for a guy that size. He's a decent inline blocker, so blocking from a traditional tight end stance is like an extra lineman. He's a decent blocker. He's had some nice numbers. He averaged 17 yards per catch last year with Miami and had 7 touchdowns, and a hard guy to bring down. The cons on him is he was a redshirt sophomore, so he doesn't have a ton of experience playing in college football. He's not the best route runner. He's going to have to improve on that. So he's got some sloppy routes, and his cuts aren't as sharp, and that's going to have to improve. And he's not as nifty after he catches as O.J. Howard is, but I think he's a really talented tight end prospect. I don't see a lot of flaws in his game. I would probably have him as my number one tight end prospect, honestly. For me, you can teach somebody to be a better route runner as a tight end, and you just can't teach that athleticism and toughness.
Yeah, and according to this scouting report, it said that he could have had more production than he did if his quarterback was more consistent. And, according to other things I've read about him, people would pretty much agree with that. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Brad Kaya, who was the quarterback, who has been linked to the Bears as a second round pick, was I haven't looked quarterbacks yet, but just in the film I watched, there's definitely quarterback throwing to him in the game film. Brad Kaya was really inconsistent in the games I watched.
Right.
And it was definitely true. Underthrown, overthrown, throw wide, wide left, wide right, leading him too far, not leading him enough. There was a lot of bad throws. But yeah, David Njoku is just a really gifted guy, and there's something about him that just screams star in the making. I could see him very Gronkowski-ish. The next guy I looked at was Evan Ingram, the tight end out of Ole Miss, 6'3", 227. He lined up quite a bit in the wide receiver position in college. He plays more like a physical wide receiver than a tight end. He's really athletic, really shifty guy, especially in space. I like that about him. The cons about him, he is a terrible blocker. He's terrible.
Yeah.
He has had some bad drops. Like he's not a natural catcher, so it's hard to explain natural catching versus like learned catching, and it might not make sense. But if you watch enough game film, you'll see guys whose hands, they're just like butter. The ball just melts in their hands, and once they catch it, there's no bobble, there's nothing. It just hits sticks like you're throwing it into a vat of glue. There's other guys who catch it and they have to, you can watch their eyes get wide and they clutch it a little too hard. It doesn't seem a natural catch. And it's not a bad thing. There's plenty of guys who've done really well in this league not being a natural catcher. But he's not a natural catcher, and he's had some drop issues, which is going to have to be really considered in his draft prospectus. He plays more like I said this as a pro, that he plays more like a physical wide receiver than a tight end, but I also have it as a con that he plays more like a physical wide receiver than a tight end as well. It's nice as that he runs like a wide receiver, but he's much more physical. That's great to have a physical play, especially more physical cornerbacks, and sometimes these refs are letting him play. But you want your tight end to be able to be a tight end, and if he's playing too much like a physical wide receiver, you're not getting the production it's a completely different position, and you can't just interchange the two. So he doesn't seem to have all of the tools of a good tight end in this league. The notes I have about him are: is he a wide receiver? Is he a halfback? Is he a tight end? How is he going to be used in the NFL? He's kind of like who's the guy on the Redskins that I'm drawing a blank on his name. That the halfback / tight end that they have.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a lot like him. Is it Jordan Reed?
Yeah, I think that's who you're thinking about. I don't know the Redskins very well. I don't pay attention to them very much. He's gonna be a guy. He's a really talented guy. He's gonna have to be. He's a sort of a niche guy that you're gonna have to find the right way to use him. And if you just stick him in a traditional tight end role, he's gonna flounder. You're gonna have a bad draft pick on your hands. But if you are a creative mind like a Kyle Shanahan or somebody that's gonna actually, or a Bill Belichick, this guy could be a good weapon because he
he has some good skills. You have to mold your system around him rather than mold him into your system.
Right, and the main thing that it says in this scouting report here is that his NFL stock is being hurt by his inability to block, and they have him projected late second round, early third round, kind of their area of where they think he's going to be selected if he is selected.
Yeah, I could see him. He's a guy that I wouldn't be shocked if he might perform at the combine, but between his combine and his pro day, he's probably going to have outstanding numbers, and he's going to shoot up on some of these boards. So I wouldn't be shocked if somebody chose him in the early second, but I wouldn't also be shocked if he fell to like a fourth round. He's a wild card, and he's going to be a guy that draft rooms because there's a lot of different guys that discuss this in the draft rooms. He's a guy that is going to create a lot of arguments because there's going to be people that love him. There's going to be people that don't like him. And I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of these draft rooms. The next guy I did was Jordan Leggett, the tight end of Clemson. 6'5", 255. Pros on him, he's got nice speed, especially for somebody that big. He's got really nice hands, a willing blocker. He can line up as a wide receiver if necessary, even though he's that big of a guy. He's very athletic. He's built like a power forward rather than a traditional tight end. Really versatile type player. But the big knock for me was he seems to lack a lot of upper body strength for somebody that big. He just seems to have mostly lower body strength, not any upper body strength, which is going to hurt him with linebackers being able to cover him or safeties covering him because they're going to be physical with him. And he's a subpar blocker. He takes way too many plays off and too many blocks off. So you'll see him just half-ass some blocks, and it's that turns me off. I like guys that are willing to just go out there and block, even if they're not good at it. And he quits on blocks. He had erratic numbers during his first 2 years in college, but he's a super athletic kid. He's got a lot of upside, and the key for him is going to be his work ethic. If he wants to be an NFL superstar, the sky is the limit for him, I think. If he wants to coast and just kind of be in the NFL, he's not going to make a second contract in this league. So with him, watching him on film, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be, for him, the big thing is going to be the interviews and what kind of things that his teammates and his coaches have to say about him, because he's uber talented. I just don't see the motivation or the heart there.
Yeah, this scouting report says, again, second, third round. It's funny with his speed that his name is Leggett. I find that kind of ironic, but pretty much you summed up everything here. He had 38 catches for 637 yards with 7 touchdowns. Well-rounded tight end he has a 3-down potential in the NFL, but, there are some flags there as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I've got 2 more guys that I looked at. I'm a big Michigan fan, so I had to do Jake Butt. Jake Butt, the tight end out of Michigan, 6'6", 248. He's the prototypical, stereotypical NFL-style tight end. Much more of prototypical than any of the other guys we talked about. He's got nice hands. He played major college football in a pro-style offense. And that's going to be key for a lot of evaluators, is that he played in a pro-style offense under Jim Harbaugh. He's a very willing blocker. He's got some decent driving power after first contact, so he doesn't always go down with that first tackle. The big knock on him, and this is sad, is he tore his ACL during the Orange Bowl. He's not going to perform at the combine. He's not going to be able to perform at his pro day. It's going to hurt his draft stock, something fierce. But then that's going to really kill his draft stock. He lacks elite speed. He's an okay blocker, nothing fancy, but based on the way he plays, he's going to have to improve his technique and his upper body strength there. My notes on him are, due to injury, somebody's going to get a really solid tight end late in the draft. He's never going to be a deep ball type threat, but short intermediate passes, he's going to be a really good safety valve for a quarterback. Not going to be a star, but I see him having a really quiet, long NFL career.
Yeah, you mentioned his blocking, and according to the notes here, he says he was better in the pass protection than run blocking, so I guess, take that with a grain of salt. And as it says here, he's got the potential to be a decent blocker. Not great, but he's not horrible.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be a poor man's Jason Witten. That's his best, at best case scenario, he's going to be a poor man's Jason Witten, where he's going to be that nice safety valve. He's never going to break that big long run, but he's always going to be that underneath guy that's going to find his way to get open and make that catch, that tough catch. The last guy I looked at was Cole Hicatini, the tight end out of Louisville, 6'5", 248. The guy had great productivity last year, really nice hands, and he was a favorite target of quarterback Lamar Jackson, who is going to be, probably the top pick next year, but in a really willing blocker. He doesn't have, the cons on him is he doesn't have a large sample size because he was a junior college transfer. He looks a lot smaller than listed. So he's listed, 6'5", 248, but he doesn't look that big out there. And he's another sort of goofy runner. He's not a great blocker or particularly strong, and he lacks that top speed, and he's not that quick either. So it's not like he has quick twitch guy. And he's not faster than a lot of linebackers, and not powerful enough to really bully safeties. I see a lot of people talking really highly of him. He's a high motor, try hard type guy. You love the heart. You wish you could put that guy's heart and ability or try into some of these other guys like O.J. Howard or Jordan Leggett. I can really appreciate that type of Rudy mentality, but at the end of the day, I'm not really high on Cole Hicatini. I think you could get a better prospect later in the draft with a Jake Butt.
Yeah, in this scouting report, it says projected round between the 3rd and the 5th, and it mentioned his really good play last year in 2016, the 49 receptions, 656 yards. So, that'll be another interesting one. Later draft pick projected, and probably as tight end depth, I guess. But so that's really all I got to add.
Yeah, so that's going to do it for this this week's draft prospects. Next week we're going to cover inside linebackers. So if you guys have any players that you want covered, feel free to let me know at any time. I've got a running tally of guys that you have asked me for that I'm going to do. And if there's running backs or tight ends I didn't do that you do want to hear about, I'm fine going back as well. So definitely, hit me up with those. And I guess the last point that I wanted to talk about was the Chicago Bulls. I wanted to end on this one because we've talked about how bad that situation is, and I never saw it getting as bad as it has been this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's gone from bad to worse. It's gone from a joke to a bigger joke, and it's pretty clear that this locker room is not a good locker room at all, and that Coach Hoiberg really has no control over this team whatsoever, and by, quote, punishing players by benching them for a few minutes to start the game and then just bring them back in only to stink. And I am referencing the game against Miami, a game in which I was sitting in section 328, I believe it was, at the United Center that night. Two really rough games from Wade and Butler, just added insult to injury, really.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's been bad. I mean, they had 3 games this week. They had the 188 loss to Miami. They had the 119-114 loss to Atlanta, and then they had a 192 win against a bad Orlando team. But regardless of what you saw there, is the big stories here are basically Wade and Butler threw Nico Mirotic and some of the other players under the bus. That was just plain and simple with their words. And as somebody that covers the Bulls and watches them, and I was shocked. I was like, I can't believe this is, this is not like, you don't expect this out of Dwayne Wade. Jimmy Butler, yeah. Derrick Rose, definitely. You just don't expect that from Wade. And I was curious to see what the team response would be, and I was not expecting Rajon Rondo's response.
Yeah, I mean, and within all this, you have Gar Forman coming out saying, "Oh well, this happens to teams, and we're not going to take any questions. But it happens, and we don't like when it happens." And that's really all I really heard from him. And it's every piece of this team is dysfunctional. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and if you don't know, is after Wade and Butler threw Nico under the bus, it was veiled, but it was pretty much obvious that it was against Nico Mirotic. Rajon Rondo posted a picture on Instagram of him with Paul Pierce and and Kevin Garnett and some of his Boston teammates that won a title, and his message on it was, "My veterans would never go to the media. They would come to the team. My vets didn't pick and choose when they wanted to bring it. They brought it every time they stepped in the gym, whether it was the practice or a game. They didn't take days off. My vets didn't care about their numbers. My vets played for the team. When we lost, they wouldn't blame us. They took responsibility and got it in the gym." That is firing back. That is firing. And that is, although it's a shot at Jimmy Butler, that was direct fire hit on Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was pretty much fighting back to everything that Jimmy said and Dwayne Wade's play and the whole attitude of the team. And I mean, it even reflects a little bit on Coach Hoiberg and his lack of control over the team as well.
Yeah, I mean, Fred Hoiberg is so out of his league. He's just so out of his league.
He really should just stick to college. I mean, really.
Yeah, and you've got who up to this point you'd consider like a pro's pro in Dwayne Wade, who's coming publicly saying, "I'm going to leave if this team doesn't improve." And then he makes those comments about Nico. Then he gets called out by Rajon Rondo. And then you have that, like the team takes a response with, they fine everybody and they bench the guys for, a couple minutes in the first quarter. But they don't take a hard stance on this. And then you've got head coach Fred Hoiberg, who, every time something happens, I get further and further into the, Rajon Rondo is right category. And it's hard to say that.
I never thought I'd think of that in my life.
Yeah, and it's coming true. Is Rajon Rondo came out and made a public response to a public cry against his teammates and said, "That's not how you act." And he's not saying that they're not right in their thoughts, but he's saying their actions are wrong. You bring this to the team. You keep this in the house. You lead by example. And he's right. You do that. And he's doing that because there was no response to that. And he was standing up for his teammates. And he was being a good teammate. And it goes along with what Casey Johnson said, is that the younger players all look up to Rajon Rondo, and that he's quietly been their leader. Not with his play, but with his actions and things, the way he carries himself and prepares. And he also said that players in this team don't know what their roles are or where they stand. And you really see that with the way the benchings that you see. So like Michael Carter Williams started 12 games in a row. Then suddenly he can't get off the bench. You have, when was the last time that Denzel Valentine, Bobby Portis, or Michael Carter Williams got in a game?
Well, Valentine played with the Windy City Bulls last night, and if that counts.
Yeah, so it's just frustrating to watch. As far as Dwayne Wade is, do you care if he leaves because he's not helping your team win? He's not playing every night. Sure, he's putting up some numbers, but he's just masking this team, how bad they are. But then on the other hand is he's so close with so many NBA stars. How is that going to impact the Bulls trying to get somebody going forward? That's bad.
Yeah, and I mean, Wade, he wants to be on a contender. He wants to win a championship. I think it's getting more and more evident that he's really, really doesn't want to be here, despite the fact that it's his hometown team in his hometown. He wants to play for another ring before he's done, and he darn well knows he's not going to get one here.
Yeah, and I think he really did want to... I think what he wanted to do was what's happening now is he wanted to get paid. He wanted to get that last big contract and
Job
then
security.
Then sort of force his way into a trade into a better team so that he was going to be on a good team and get a salary.
And he thought, hey, why not my hometown Chicago Bulls?
Yeah, so I can always have that. I played for my hometown team. Whatever. Trade him to Cleveland. Let him go there and play with LeBron, because LeBron's already crying about, I don't have enough players to win. Blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
whatever. But then you have Jaren Grant coming out and tweeting after all of this nonsense, and I feel bad for this guy. He's tweeting that he loves basketball more than anything as a response to Rajon Rondo and Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade, and clearly there's a lot of lack of communication within this organization on multiple levels. You have the front office not communicating with anybody. You have the head coach not communicating with his players. The players not communicating with each other. And you've got the young guys who just don't know where they stand, and they're hearing them getting, veiled call-outs in media, and instead of being told, like, that's clear. If Jaren Grant is going to tweeting out that I love this game and I'm working hard, that clearly he doesn't know where he stands with management. He doesn't know where he stands with Wade and Butler. That's not a good position for this poor kid to be in.
Right, he's this kid, and he's got these veterans in front of him, and he doesn't know where he fits in with them, in the locker room and on the court. So he's stuck in this horrible position. Same goes with a number of these kids. And you have these other kids like Valentine and Portis who aren't playing at all. It's just the whole system is just so messed up. There is no organization. There is no direct path. It is just a jumbled mess that doesn't look like it's going to be getting better anytime soon. And that brings me to the Miami game. I told you before we started the show I kind of wanted to share my my experience with that. I don't know did you watch any of that game?
I watched a little bit of it, and I watched highlights afterwards because I couldn't take the rest of that game.
Yeah, well, to sum it up, you knew as soon as you walked in the United Center that the energy that you're so used to seeing at the United Center for the Bulls, it wasn't there, because everyone knew of what was going on. And the game started, and there were a decent amount of empty seats at tip-off. It filled up decently then, and there was still maybe a couple thousand empty seats, but it was pretty much full overall. But the crowd was into it when big plays were made in the beginning, but they kind of drifted away, and that place was really quiet the second half because everything was going badly. Jimmy Butler was like 1 for 15 with 3 points. I mean, it was probably the worst I've ever seen Jimmy Butler play, and yet Dwayne Wade, I mean, the shooting for the Bulls was horrific. The only one to make three-point shots, like the only two they had, were from Paul Zipser, for goodness sake. And then, with 5 minutes left, half the United Center bails, and then all of us who were left at the final buzzer, we booed them off the court. The United Center booed them off the court. And it wasn't just scattered boos, it was a just collective shower of boos from everyone left in that stadium. And I've never seen that before. I've never seen the Bulls get just booed off the court like that. And, you know, the fans are not dumb. And Garpax can try to sell this BS all they want, but the fans darn well know that this is a train wreck and that it's poorly managed and that this is not good now, and it's not going to be good for a while because the Bulls are in basketball hell.
Yeah, I mean, just to sum it up in a couple of quick statements, is Doran Dragic scored 26 points with 11 assists. Willie Reed and Dion Waiters had 20 and 19 respectively, and they mopped the floor with the Bulls without Hassan Whiteside playing.
Yeah, he wasn't in the game.
Dwayne Wade led the Bulls with 15 points. Jimmy Butler had 3 points in 33 minutes.
Horrible. Yeah.
And none of the other games this week were any better. Is Wednesday's in that game, they lost 119-114 to Atlanta. And the Bulls gave up a combined 42 points from Dennis Schroeder and Thabo Sefolosha. That's bad. You can't do that. They couldn't stop Howard in the paint. And sure, Butler had 40 and Wade had 33, but the Bulls gave up a 10-point lead down the stretch. And, you know, Wade made his comment, I'm a 35-year-old man. I have 3 NBA championships. It shouldn't hurt me more than it hurts them. They have to want it. Butler said his team didn't deliver a consistent basis, and they don't take losses as hard as they should. And then the Tuesday win, even the win against Orlando is bad. Orlando's a bad team, and it took a Herculean effort by Wade and Butler to beat them.
Yeah.
Wade scored 7 of his 21 in the fourth quarter. He was a game where he didn't fade in the fourth quarter, surprisingly. Butler scored 20. Wade had 21. Felicio had 12. Doug McDermott had 12, and those were the only players to score in double digits. Nico had 4 points on a 1-for-5 shooting night. So it's just been a bad week for the Bulls, and it's gone from bad to worse. Like, you would think, all right, that was a bad game, even though we won. It should get better from here. It just got epically worse.
Yeah. Yes, it did. You know, the Bulls, the way they carry themselves in the locker room, on social media, with the media, and you see the same stuff throughout this entire season. But have we honestly, because I haven't, I don't know if you have, but have you heard anything from the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf? I mean, what does he think of all this? Isn't he upset about this? He should be upset about this. I mean, this is an absolute train wreck. I know he loves his Sox more than anything, but come on, you're still the owner of one of the biggest franchises in sports. Voice some displeasure. This is not going right. Take some action. Something's got to be done. It's clear that this management should be ridden of. I don't get why the same stuff is allowed to happen over and over with no consequence.
None consequence. And you know what? Jerry Reinsdorf is a rich guy, and he's making money, and he's not going to rock that boat. He might say winning is important, and he doesn't have a lot of time left on his clock. But you know what? Money trumps winning.
Right. And look, let's face it, and I don't want to offend any Southsiders, but Sox fans invest more in the Sox when they're winning. The Bulls, they're a much bigger franchise, value-wise, and they have one of the biggest fan bases in all sports. And even when they're they're not performing well like this, I mean, they still fill the United Center pretty much, if not full, pretty close to full, despite, a few empty seats here or there, but the money is still being spent on that team. Are jersey sales down for the Bulls compared to 5 years ago? Yes, they are, but he's still making a decent amount of money where, he cares about the Sox for the most part, and he wants, to really improve them so people invest in them more, whereas the Bulls, ever since the Jordan era, they're one of the cash cows of sports.
Yeah, and I don't really want to keep digging into the Bulls. They're so frustrating. But I want to wrap up on one last thing. I forgot that we had a question from YouTube. Is answered as a question on the comment section, but I wanted to ask your opinion as well. The question was, do you think the Bears will make the playoffs next year?
No, I don't think so. I think they can be improved. Going into last year, before the 15 plus IR stints for the Bears, I thought that they were gonna be around 500, maybe like a 7-9, 8-8, the very best team. If they can stay healthy and make some right draft picks, that's where I kind of see them right now. But I don't see them being good enough to get into the playoffs just yet next year, even if the players are mostly healthy, even if things in the draft go right. I still think they're, a year or so away from even thinking about that. I mean, and one of the reasons is it's going to be really hard to beat out the Packers in the playoffs. It seems like even if the stars align, the Packers somehow run the table and make it into the playoffs, whether it's a combination of Aaron Rodgers and just plain voodoo magic. But, I just think the competition around them is still going to be too great, even if things do go well. But I'd be happy with a step in the right direction with a at least close to 500 record. But no, I do not see playoffs.
Yeah, my comment was pretty much that the NFL can have some really quick turnarounds, much quicker than any other sport. If, and this is a big if, capitalized if the Bears can stay relatively healthy and they bring back Alshon Jeffrey just so they have the talented wide receiver core, and the number 3 pick is actually an impact player as a rookie, and they're able to at least stabilize that quarterback position. I don't expect them to solve it, but if they can get, at least stabilize that, like the first couple of games of the Matt Barkley era, or even the Brian Hoyer type play. If you can just stabilize that and establish the running game, you've got a chance. You've got a chance to be a wild card. And the base that on is, you have no idea what's going to happen with Minnesota. They just tanked, and I feel like if the way they played in the second half, the Bears are better. They could be better than that next year. The Lions, again, they're just the Lions, and they do Lions things. So you never know.
I think their playoff run was kind of a fluke. I'm just going to throw that out there. They played fundamentally good football throughout a lot of the season, but I don't really think they are a playoff roster. Matt Stafford's really good, not taking that away from him. They have a really good kicker, and they have some good defensive pieces, but I don't think they are a true playoff team.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of ifs that go into it, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. But like you said, they're definitely going to be improved, and you never know. What if Aaron Rodgers breaks a leg? That just makes everything wide open. I mean, you don't wish any injuries on people, but they happen, and
right.
They can be impactful. And I'm not a big fan of their backup quarterback. So whether, regardless of what he did in preseason, I'm not a big fan of him. So it's anything's a possibility, but I probably see them being an improved team, probably 6-7 wins. maybe even 8-8. I just see them not making the playoffs. But if a couple of bounces go their way, wild card is a possibility if they can stabilize that wide receiver position.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, anything is possible. I just wouldn't count on it, is what I should probably say. I wouldn't count on the season being the return to the playoffs. But at the end of the day, anything is possible. So,
Yeah. So I think that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. I think we had a pretty good show. So make sure you guys, however you listen to podcasts, you're hitting subscribe, whether it be iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Follow us on social media. Alex is at ShyFanPat1, at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, and SwerskiSports.com. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you have questions, comments, concerns, hit us up on any of those social media, and we will make sure we talk about it. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on the plains.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.